Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really happy to introduce you to David Siegel. He is a educator who's been working with children in educational and clinical settings for over a decade now. He's been a preschool teacher, so all you preschool teachers watching, he really has been in the class and knows what happens there. And he's currently an associate marriage and family therapist. I've seen some video clips of David in the preschool, so that's why I wanted to invite him on the summit, because he does a lot of work with mindfulness and very young children. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So first of all, tell us from your perspective what mindfulness is and why it's important.
Sure. So rather than going into a definition, I'm sure your viewers by now have heard the definition a million times. So I think it's important to ask, what are the problems that mindfulness is trying to solve and address? If we look at the world that we're living in these days, and especially the world that our children are growing up in, it's filled with a lot of demands, a lot of stimulation, lots of distractions, and all of these things really create an environment that is very challenging to navigate, and we can see problems manifesting like attentional deficits, just being generally distracted, having lots of stress, and being compulsive. And by compulsivity, I don't just mean behavior, the things that we can see, but also a compulsive engagement in thinking, and a compulsive involvement with our emotions, or reactivity with our emotions. And these are compulsive processes like rumination that happen inside of us. And those can also be very problematic and lead to things like anxiety and depression. So if we look at this setting that children are growing up in, it's quite a lot to manage. And really we're starting to look at the processes of what's going on inside of us, not necessarily what we need to fix around us or about us, but what's happening inside of us. And are our minds able to manage it all or surf it all in a way where we can have some stillness, some space, where we're not so scattered. If we have challenging situations that we encounter, and there's nothing we can do to protect our children from that to happen, that they're able to navigate it. So mindfulness, I think, emerged as a tool to help us cultivate kind of an awareness of the processes that are happening within. So,
really thing for kids, and I just said, the anxiety and depression rate of teens in the States has gone from 25 to 50% in the last 5 years, or it was something crazy anyway. So if we can help preschoolers to develop these kind of skills, that would be fantastic, and obviously ourselves first, I think. So David, tell us, what do you think is most important when we're thinking about mindfulness in children?
That is a very important question to consider as anybody who's interested in this kind of thing. And it's a question I get a lot. What's the best way to teach mindfulness to children? And usually my response is that it's not the teaching part, because mindfulness is a very nuanced skill that I think all of us, even the top professionals in the field who have a lifetime of practice with this thing, are still trying to grasp. And And so I think if we're honest with that, and rather than teaching mindfulness like any other skill that we might teach to young children, like the alphabet or colors or days of the week or whatever, that it's not as simple as delivering content. It's really something that you have to practice yourself. You can only practice mindfulness in yourself. You can't practice it in other people. So it's not something that you can do to children, but it is something that you can practice for yourself. And as you practice for yourself, you move away from this place of instruction and more to this place of really being present with the children that you're involved with in your life. And, really responding to them in a very sensitive way. And that's a key difference that comes up in a lot of mindfulness literature, the difference between a reaction and a response. And the reaction being something that just happens automatically without really being aware of the process that's going on. And the response being bringing this awareness of what's going on inside yourself, for example, before you intervene and do something about it. So the result could be the same. Say a young child does something that you just told them not to do, right? And yeah, can you imagine that happening? I can't imagine that ever happening. So you just tell a child, don't do something, and please don't do something, however you do it, and they do it. Now, there might be an emotional reaction that happens in your body, and that's okay. And the reaction might be, I told you not to do that, or to intervene. But if there's a little bit of space where you see, wow, I was triggered here. I didn't like that. Maybe I felt like I was not in control or not safe in this environment because the children are just doing whatever they want. Whatever it is, if we're honest with our own processes, and then we choose to do something about it, well, that's not only is that something that mindfulness will help us be able to do, but it really helps children develop their own mindfulness skills, because people just bounce off of each other. And if I've learned anything from the preschool classroom environment, it's that, if there's one kid that comes in with a certain kind of energy, everybody just takes it on. And so if you can be this space in the middle of that classroom and be this non-reactive presence, that is one of the biggest gifts that you can give children to allow them to unfold these skills naturally on their own.
Yeah, I love what you just said. So tell us, David, how can we develop our own mindfulness skills? What are some of the things that you recommend if people are looking to explore this in their own lives?
Wonderful. Yes. So if that is something that, we can buy into, that it has to start with ourselves and we practice with ourselves first. There's lots we can do, and we're very lucky to have these kinds of things be popular right now, because there's just so many resources out there on the internet and YouTube and meditation apps. And there's also a lot of advice out there. And I would encourage anyone who's interested about this stuff to not get too caught up in trying to do it right and figure out the best technique or skill, the trick to do meditation. There's a lot of different mindfulness practices. And so I'd encourage anyone who's interested to try them out, see what works for them. Some people will say it's better to do something consistently for a small amount of time rather than to practice, 2 hours once a week. And my thoughts are, I'm not sure it matters. I think the important thing is that you're putting forth effort to practice something, and there's no easy way around it. It requires effort and figuring out what works for you. So that's what I would encourage anyone who wants to practice this. And I think also, the understanding about mindfulness is also something that I think we can get carried away with a little bit. Getting in the concepts of what it is and it's a very interesting thing. And I know I can get lost in just hours and hours of reading about mindfulness and all these things about mindfulness. But until we get our hands in there and practice ourselves, that's when we start seeing the effect for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way to put it, because especially I think educators, we love reading and taking courses and finding out things. And yeah, so that was a really, really good point. So David, tell us about what you've implemented a mindfulness curriculum in preschools and other schools. So tell us, what are some of the biggest kind of challenges that you faced when you were doing that, or that we might face doing that in schools?
Yes. So there are a lot of challenges with doing this, and especially a school system. And one of the biggest one, which I touched on a little bit earlier, was this idea that mindfulness is a practice rather than just another curriculum that's delivered. And so a lot of times in the system, there'll be this idea of like, okay, we're going to fit mindfulness into here. This will be our mindfulness time, and then we'll do math, and then we'll do English, and then maybe at the end of the day, we'll do mindfulness. And there's nothing wrong with having mindfulness time, but we really need to start looking at mindfulness as not necessarily something we teach, but something that we can integrate into the culture of a school system. And really, I see it as more of an environmental and personal on the part of the teachers and caregivers, a shift that we take on this stuff instead of trying to have the children take on mindfulness. And this is definitely a big challenge, especially because there are so many things in motion in the school system. There are responsibilities, and there are paperworks, and there are other curriculums we have to follow, and demands with ratios and staffing and time limitations, and there's a million things we have to navigate. But in the face of all those challenges, the most important thing is to be able to stay true to your own practice while you navigate all of those things. So creating that shift is a challenge, and really it can only start with ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I think a lot of research is coming out, isn't there, about mindfulness with teachers' well-being,
Yeah.
And how helpful that is, because it's a stressful job. Can be the most rewarding job in the world, but as you said, there's many demands on teachers these days.
Mm-hmm.
So David, tell us a little bit about maybe some of the tools and techniques that we can use in the classroom to bring mindfulness into our classes.
Sure. So now that we've covered the important part, which is we have to take this on ourselves. It's like, okay, that's great. I promise I'm going to do that. Now what do I do with the kids, right? And there's a lot we can do. And before, I can share a couple specific tools that I use. And before I go there, I think it's important that we talk about a couple of the components of mindfulness. There's a researcher named Shinzen Young. He is a monk and also a scholar. And he talks about 3 different components of mindfulness: concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. And concentration is pretty straightforward. It's the ability to direct and sustain our attention. That's the first and maybe most important part of any mindfulness practice when working with young children, especially preschool age, being able to develop a sense of concentration. The second is sensory clarity, and that is the ability to differentiate between all of the different phenomena that are happening in our experience. So being able to know, this is something that I'm feeling inside of my body. This is an emotion. Or, I'm thinking about something or I'm having a judgmental thought, or I'm experiencing something through my sensory perceptions, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, the five senses. Did I get those off? So being able to know what's what is actually, it sounds pretty straightforward, but it can actually sometimes get crossed in our minds. And so a lot of practices will also develop that ability. And the third is this sense of equanimity, which the way I understand it kind of happens automatically. It's this kind of objective sense of calm that happens from just being able to detach and watch something happen as it unfolds. Now, all these things, concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity, they happen closely together. But when we're working with young children, I find it very helpful to just stick with the concentration part. We want to encourage self-awareness, and concentration is an important prerequisite to be aware of the self. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to, we might see, oh, that's something, and then get distracted instantly and not really have any kind of space to really get in touch with what's going on. So a lot of the concrete tools and things that I use with young children really focus on that concentration component. And there are two different ways, generally speaking, of how you can help somebody develop concentration or sustain their attention. The first is to give them something that really grabs or holds their attention, something that's a stimulating sensation. And this is great. Kids love, especially preschool age children. We do a lot of sensory work, getting your hands in paint and goo and all kinds of fun things that they want to, get their hands on. So when engaging in sensory experiences, we can coach them in directing their attention. Wow, doesn't that feel cool? And where do you feel it? And giving them something to stick to. And what I like to use is a bucket of ice water or cold water, because it really grabs your attention. But it also gives you practice to regulate emotional and physiological arousal, because if it's cold enough, it does kind of activate the nervous system a little bit, and maybe your body might go into a fight, flight, or freeze response because it's cold. And so that is also a great way to practice dealing with that kind of thing in a controlled environment. Say, wow, you put your hand in there and then you just yanked them out. What was going on there? And really encouraging some introspection around, if that's uncomfortable, where do you feel that discomfort? Is it in that bucket, or is it happening inside yourself? And the answer is, it's always happening inside yourself. And so that is one of the ways that I use, the particularly powerful way that I use sensory experiences to help children direct attention for themselves. But we also need to be careful about that. There's a key distinction there of letting them direct the attention on themselves instead of grabbing it for them. Because a lot of times in the classroom, when things aren't going our way, we kind of instinctually raise our voice, right? We go, Johnny, or, speaking a little louder. And what that does is it grabs their attention. Things that are loud and stimulating and noisy grab our attention. So we want to be careful about how we use stimulating, loud, salient sensory experiences to grab the attention of our children, to give them the opportunity to direct it for themselves. So that's the first way of working on attention, giving them something strong to hold on to. The other way, which is way more difficult, and I don't have something concrete for that, but it would be, if you want someone to be able to sustain their attention, instead of giving them something loud or noisy or bright or interesting, you make a whole environment very calming and soothing and free of distraction, where you don't need something particularly loud to hold your attention, because you don't have a million things and bright colors and loud noises and people around you that are battling for your attention. And that is something that I personally am trying to develop a little bit more. I think it's an important part of creating a mindful classroom, being critical about how the environment plays a role in our attention, which is an important part of mindfulness. But I think in general, that's a great place to start, giving special attention to sensory experiences and the child's ability to direct their own attention to them.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I work in a lot of different countries, and just seeing my husband's Italian, so my sister-in-law works in a school, and it's so calm, and the environment is so calm in most of the schools that I visited there, and Reggio, it's so beautiful as well, and then the Scandinavian schools, and it's just so different in every country. But I think, creating that peace and really looking at the environment, because some classrooms are really crazy. I mean, no wonder people are distracted, right? There's cartoon things and all kinds of things all over the place. So, I love what you said. So going back, David, we talked a little bit about, at the beginning, that technology changing our world drastically. So how can that kind of interfere or help or hinder, I don't know, our mindfulness practice? Because we've got all the apps and things on all these things, but we know that more people are spending a lot of time on phones and iPads and things. So can you just talk maybe a little bit to that?
Yes. So that is a very important thing that we as adults are looking at now. There's no getting around the fact that there are iPads and iPhones everywhere. And personally, I can speak from my own experiences. When I see young children walking around like this, I don't like it very much. And I have to be honest with myself that that's my own preference, for one, that there's something that there's something that triggers me, that maybe I want children to be interacting with each other or with me instead of their phones, or I want them to grow up with a different set of skills, ones that I worked on when I was growing up. And before I try to do too much to intervene, I really like to look at my own preferences in the matter, because it is very possible that children growing up these days they're going to need to have a certain level of skill set in working with technology that we never really needed to develop. But that being said, it is really important to look critically at, okay, if we are going to be using technology, how does it enhance our lives and how does it hinder our lives? And really making sure that children, as they grow older, are able to see that for themselves and make that call for themselves. And one of the dangers in using technology, especially at a young age, as far as I'm able to see, is that it really hinders that concentration component that we talked about, especially relating to developing regulation skills and mindfulness practice, being able to concentrate, because screens and iPads and iPhones and all of these devices are really stimulating. They've got a lot of bright colors and novel imagery and sounds, and you can flip through it it's always there, and you can always just have something exciting to look at. And this, if we always have this available to us, it really limits our ability to exercise directing our attention for ourselves. We don't really have to fight with any other stimulation in the room, because we've got something that's just holding our attention. It just hooks us in. And I think this can be a problem because it encourages addictive tendencies and compulsive tendencies of using our phones and our iPads compulsively. I certainly have this problem where I just reach to my pocket and pull out my phone compulsively without even being aware that I'm doing it. And even when I tell myself I don't want to be looking at my phone right now, I have trouble breaking that pattern. And it's because I've learned, yeah, a lot of us are having this issue, and it's because we've engaged our attention in the regulatory circuits in our brain. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to go into too much of it here, but we've learned to interact with technology a certain way, and that's hindered our ability to direct our attention for ourselves and even be in control of our own behavior. So it's something that we definitely have to look at, especially when children are young and they can't even make these decisions for themselves yet. You know, are we helping them grow up so they can make these decisions for themselves and use technology as a way to enhance their lives instead of using it compulsively?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're so right. We need to, because there's a lot of good coming out of the technology as well as, so we don't want to, just, although I always remember before the internet, you probably don't, you look too young to remember that, but yeah, I do, and life seemed to be a lot simpler, maybe back then. So, but I think, yeah, exactly what you said, teaching the students how to manage that, and so it's a choice and it's not something that's controlling us, but that we're able to manage and use to our benefit. So
yeah, like we are right now, we're using technology. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We wouldn't have a summit if all this wasn't here. So so tell us how mindfulness might help us as educators to kind of develop our skills and our roles as being teachers or guidance counselors or caregivers or whatever role we're playing at the moment.
Yeah, so as we develop our own mindfulness practice, we really develop a sensitivity. We heighten our perception of our own experience of life by just taking some time to be still, to be curious about what's going on. We really do develop a nuanced way of perceiving the world. And when we do this as an educator, we open ourselves up to huge new worlds of possibilities of impacting the children that we work with. And we shift from not just helping them through our instructional methods and giving them, knowledge and tools, but really we develop this sensitivity to creating a nourishing, healing environment for them to flourish. And we can look at the environment and all of the things that are happening around us with some sensitivity and some awareness that will help us be able to manage it in ways that are much more attuned to the needs of the children. We're also able to really, with sensitivity, look at the relationship that we have with the children and how our reactivity or how our own processes are influencing the people around us, because they certainly do. And we're also able to look at ourselves and our own needs and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we can be there for others. And so being skilled at all of these things, looking at ourselves, looking at our relationships, looking at the environment, this is something that a mindfulness practice really helps develop some sensitivity around. And that will really enhance your ability to navigate the preschool classroom or any setting where there's young children from a whole bunch of different angles. And instead of referring to a particular methodology or particular curriculum, you're referring to the infinite number of things that are happening in the present moment right in front of you. and using that as a source of understanding and using that material to work with and help the children in your lives.
Oh, wonderful. So I wanted to mention that David, he's working as an education consultant, helping preschools that want to bring in mindfulness, and he also helps individuals who want to develop their own mindfulness practice. So we have a speaker bio link under this video. If you click that, you can find out more about David and the work that he's doing, and he has kindly offered to give a special rate as well to people. If you mentioned that you found him through the MindBE Summit. So I just wanted to mention that. But just before we end today, David, tell us a little bit about how your background in preschool led you to creating the work that you're doing today.
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing I learned from being in a classroom filled with young children on a daily basis is that they have more to teach me than I could ever teach them. And they just come into the room with this life and this joy and this enthusiasm that to me makes more sense than anything else I've learned in my growing up. And so that's something that I've always wanted to understand and figure out. And I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I certainly try a lot. And I know that I see them as the experts, and as such, there's a lot of things that rather than learning what I have to do, I'd like to figure out how to get out of the way, and let them kind of lead a little bit, because especially when it comes to mindfulness, children are already so mindful. I mean, if we're using the definition of being aware of the present moment and being non-judgmental, you can't look at a kid jumping and splashing in a puddle and tell me they're not in the present moment, smiling and laughing, and they're not thinking about the bills they have to pay tomorrow or what so-and-so did to them yesterday. They are in the present moment. And so the one thing I learned from being around them on a daily basis is that they've got a lot to offer us. And rather than trying to fix any of the problems that might unfold as they grow up, I think it's really important to just step out of the way a little bit and try to create a space where they can stay in touch with that presence, with that mindfulness, with that enthusiasm and joy that they have for being alive in the present moment as they grow up.
Yeah, I love that, and I totally agree. They're the best teachers in the world. So thank you so much, David, for joining us and sharing that. And I'd remind everyone again, you can find out more about David on the speaker link below. And thank you again for joining the summit.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.